You're listening to the Touchdown Under Podcast with Jack, Emilian, Anthony, and Ruth. Hello, everybody, and welcome back to the Touchdown Under Podcast. I'm Jack, your host, and as always, I'm joined by Emilian.
Hey, how's it going?
Anthony.
Good to be here.
And Ruth.
Good to be back.
Now, today is episode 13, and once again, it is a State of the Franchise episode, our third of 4 in this series, and today we'll be going through the AFC East and AFC West teams. But as always, we're going to kick it off with our news segment, and making news in the league this week was San Francisco 49ers tight end George Kittle, who has re-signed with the team for 5 years, $75 million, with a total guaranteed amount of $40 million. Emilian, did the 49ers pay Kittle too much money?
Absolutely not. I think he's the best tight end in the league, and he's really the biggest, really the only threat in that passing game over there. So it's important that they lock him up, for the future, and I think they paid him just the right amount. I think he deserves to be the highest paid tight end in the league.
I agree. However, I feel like he did get a little bit too much money. I feel like $40 million guaranteed for a tight end is a little bit too much. He's getting about $15 million a year, and I feel like that's a little bit too much per year for a tight end. Kansas City Chiefs tight end Travis Kelce has re-signed with the team for 4 years, $57.25 million, with a total guaranteed amount of $28 million. Arif, did Kelce deserve as much money as Kittle?
I think he certainly was deserving of a contract like that. He's one of the best tight ends in the NFL, and it's an accurate representation of his value to the Chiefs franchise. Now the Chiefs have many of their best stars re-signed this offseason, so they should look to make another Super Bowl run with this roster.
Do you think Kittle is better than Kelce?
I don't think he is at this point in time. I feel like probably next season he will have overtaken him, considering Kelce's getting up there in age. But if we're talking about a career, obviously I think Kelce has had the better career to this point, but I'm sure Kittle will get there some point in the future.
And finally, the Dallas Cowboys have signed former Vikings defensive lineman Everson Griffen to a 1-year, $6 million contract. Anthony, how much does Griffen improve Dallas's defensive line?
Oh, yeah, tons. It was really good for the Vikings over that 10-year period he spent there. I think, the Cowboys really made the right decision in signing him. I think it's a no-brainer, especially someone that talent, being in the free agent market. I think, one of the better things the Cowboys have done in the offseason is get him.
Now, the last bit of news this week was the New England Patriots, who signed former Texans running back Lamar Miller. Boys, what do you think Miller's inclusion to the Patriots backfield means?
I think it'll be very interesting to see how much of the ball he's going to get. We know that Sonny Michel has been the feature back since really he was drafted, but Lamar Miller's production in 2018 was quite good. It's unfortunate that he missed all of last season, but I think it definitely brings another layer to the Patriots running attack and definitely boosts their offense as a whole.
All right, that caps off our news segment for this week, and we're going to move straight into our State of the Franchise, beginning with the AFC East and the New England Patriots. And our first question for them is, do the Patriots make or miss the playoffs this year? Arif?
I think they'll make the playoffs this year. However, even with the Newton signing, with all their opt-outs, I don't think they'll be able to win the division, especially with a strong Bills team that they'll have to contend with.
I think if all those players that did opt out hadn't have opted out, I reckon that the Patriots would definitely be in the contention of winning division again. But as to whether or not they make the playoffs again this year, or whether or not they miss it, I think they just make it. I think, especially with having that third wildcard spot available in the AFC, I think they do make the playoffs again this year.
Yeah, I think they do make the playoffs. I'm not ready to say that they won't win the division or they will. I feel like there's a chance they do, but I feel like either way, whether it be through a wild card position or if they do win the division, that they do make the playoffs. I think the Newton signing goes a long way to determining that. Obviously, you've still got Edelman there, who I think will definitely build chemistry with Newton, and I think will be the number one target. The defense is still there. It's a really good defense, even with the COVID opt-outs, as you mentioned, Anthony. Belichick is still the head coach, and he will have some tricks up his sleeve. I feel like we may even see a couple more signings from him to try and compensate for those losses, but I have no doubts that with Belichick still in charge, that the Patriots will find a way to make it back to the postseason.
I'm going to go a different direction of you. I think they'll miss the playoffs just slightly. And a big part of that is because they did lose several strong players, especially on that defense. It's mainly Dante Hightower. In my opinion, he's a cornerstone to that defense. But also their offense, I really don't think it'll be that strong. I do not think that Newton is as good a quarterback as Brady was. I think he's a downgrade, and he's nowhere near the leader that Brady was. So they haven't really changed much on that offense in regards to the weapons available for the quarterback. And I think there are other strong teams in the AFC that will make the playoffs over the Patriots.
Our second question for New England is, how much time does Bill Belichick have left?
For me, he's got nothing left to prove. So he's going to stop when he's not enjoying the game anymore. And that, I think, ties into whether or not the Patriots will be successful in the next few years. I think if they'll, have a losing record for the next few seasons, I don't think Belichick is going to stay around for much longer at all. He's going to go into retirement. This season will also show who benefited the most between him and Brady. So it's kind of a prove-it year for him to show that, Brady wasn't the main reason for the Patriots' success. It was more on Bill Belichick's side.
I completely agree, Million. I feel like whether he does stay around much longer is dependent on the Patriots' immediate success or failure. I feel like if they do have a losing season this season, and if they do miss the playoffs, as you're suggesting, I feel like people will start to ponder how much time he has left. He is 68 years old. That is important to remember. But as you said as well, he has nothing to prove. He will give up when he wants to give up, and that may be sooner than we expect if the Patriots do kind of slide in these next couple of seasons, Anthony.
Yeah, I completely agree with what you're saying, Jack. I think, you mentioned he's 68 years old. He's proven everything he has to prove in the league. I think it's up to him when he wants to retire. He's not going to hang around to rebuild the Patriots to get back to that Super Bowl contention. I don't think so. I think if I had to put a number as to how many years he has left, I'd probably give it around 2 to 3.
On to the New York Jets now, and our first question for them is Adam Gase the right man to lead his franchise? And personally, I'm not sure that he is. He was pretty horrible in Miami as a head coach, and I think he might just be better served as an offensive coordinator like he was in Chicago before he made the move to the Dolphins.
I'm on the same page as you, Jack. I don't think he's the right man at all. The fans are already calling for him to be sacked. The Dolphins, their fans are very happy that he's gone and he's, on another. I think he's holding the team back. Jamal Adams called him out for a reason. I think the Jets need a new head coach as soon as possible, to be honest.
I completely agree with you, Jack. You mentioned that he's probably better fitted as an offensive coordinator rather than a head coach. I completely agree with you. You mentioned his tenure in Chicago was, he performed pretty well there, and also in 2013 and 2014 with the Broncos it was definitely his best few years in the NFL as a coach. He took the Broncos, to their highest scoring season back in 2013, and I don't think he's definitely not the right man as the head coach role for the Jets. He's definitely better suited as offensive coordinator, in my opinion.
I agree with all of you guys. He doesn't seem to take much accountability when things aren't going well on his team, and he often throws certain players under the bus, such as Jamal Adams, who we'll talk about later. I feel like this could be his last year at the Jets if things don't go to plan.
On to our second question for the Jets, and that is, what kind of impact will the loss of Jamal Adams have, Million?
I think the whole team will struggle because of his departure. On defense, they don't have a star playmaker anymore. CJ Mosley obviously opted out of the season. So with the lack of star power there in Jamal Adams, the defense is going to have a rough time this year. Quinton Williams, definitely a good rookie last season. He's definitely going to have to take his game to a whole other level, as will the rest of the defense if they want to minimize the impact of Jamal Adams leaving.
I think the biggest thing that the Jets lose with the departure of Jamal Adams is that ability to create turnovers and stop teams in their tracks. He's definitely the best strong safety in the league at the Jets. I reckon he can replicate that in Seattle, but for the Jets, I really think as you mentioned, CJ Mosley opting out adds even more stress to the Jets defense. I don't think they can handle the loss of Jamal Adams on top of CJ Mosley opting out.
I think they're going to have to rely on the development of lesser players to kind of come through and make up for that loss of Adams, because even though I feel like McDougald isn't a terrible replacement for Adams, I do think the defense as a whole will take a step back this season. And as I said, it will be on those lesser players to start, developing and taking steps forward.
I agree. I feel like his impact is not only just on the field, but also in the locker room. He was one of the team captains at the Jets, and his loss will be felt in both areas.
On to move now to the Miami Dolphins, and our first question for them is, will they finish at the bottom of the AFC East?
Honestly, I can't say for certain whether or not the Dolphins or the Jets will finish last, because both of them have added plenty of talent to their roster in the offseason, especially the Dolphins adding players like Byron Jones, Kyle Van Noy, and Matt Breida. They drafted Tua in the first round. The roster has a lot of talent to definitely at least avoid finishing last in the AFC East. But to whether or not they can avoid that over the Jets, it's kind of a toss-up at this point. I'm not entirely sure. I don't think we can say who will finish last until the season starts.
I think they will finish last. Obviously, Tua and those off-season acquisitions you referred to, Anthony, they will need time to, gel with the other players. And I feel like Darnold and the Jets will continue to improve. At least the offensive side will continue to improve. And I feel like the Jets are a little bit further along in their development as a team as opposed to Miami. Emilian?
I think they'll finish third in the division, and the reason I say that is I agree with you guys. The new additions will definitely need time to develop. Tua Tagovailoa, he's definitely going to need time to get familiar with the system. But I feel like on paper, the Dolphins have a better roster, and there's a lot less drama regarding the locker room and management. So I feel that the Dolphins definitely have the potential to be more of that, 6-10, 7-9 team, whereas the Jets, I think they'll honestly struggle a lot more this season than they did last year.
I agree, Emilian. Anthony's talked in a previous episode about kind of the two tiers in the AFC East. The two teams vying for the playoff spots and the two others in their rebuilding phase. And I feel like the Dolphins are on top of the Jets in that second tier. I feel like they've really improved this offseason, and they should finish third in their division.
Arif, what makes you say they're on top of the Jets, though?
I feel like they have, firstly, I think they have a better management system in place and also more proven veterans on their team. We mentioned before about CJ Mosley opting out. I think he was definitely one of the leaders on that defense in addition to Adams, who also left. So I think it's mainly based on their management and their veteran players.
I do want to mention, though, that the Dolphins' offense is definitely going to hold the team back as a whole. DJ Parker's a great receiver, but he proved that last year wasn't just a fluke. And as well as Alan Hurns and Albert Wilson opting out, the offensive line is one of the worst in the league, so it's going to be hard for Jordan Howard and Matt Breida to get going. But I still feel overall, on paper, especially on defense, they're a better team than the Jets right now.
While they are a better team on paper on defense than the Jets, I feel like if we ever look at rookie quarterbacks in past years, in their rookie seasons, they've not had much success, at all. And so I don't feel like we can just say that, because Miami will need to have a competent offense to be better than the Jets this season. They can't just rely on their defense. I feel like Darnold has now had a few seasons in New York, and he's acquainted himself with that offensive scheme. And that's why I think they're further along in their development as a team than Miami, because Tua, he hasn't played a snap with that offense yet. And it's going to take a fair bit of time, likely a whole season, to kind of gel and build chemistry.
I don't think that Tua is actually going to be the starter, at least for the start of the season. I think Ryan Fitzpatrick is definitely going to hold that position for a while, and hopefully Tua can just sit behind him and learn. And that would honestly be more beneficial to the team as a whole, because Ryan Fitzpatrick did play a full season with the team, and he's built chemistry with Devontae Parker, whereas Tua, he'd be thrown to the wolves if he started straight off the bat.
That's true. I don't think he will start straight away, but he's definitely going to feature at some point this season. And, whether it's at the start or towards the end, he's still going to need, game time with the rest of those players to, build chemistry. And even if he kind of steps in the middle of the season or towards the end, he's still going to have periods where he's going to struggle in that rookie season. And yeah, that's why I feel like even if Fitzpatrick plays more of the season as a starting quarterback in Miami, they'll still be a worse team than the Jets. I want to move now to the second question for Miami, and that is, when will their defense finally improve? And I feel like it's this season. I mean, you'd at least hope so, especially after acquiring Byron Jones, Shaq Lawson, Kyle Van Noy, Emmanuel Ogba, and a promising rookie cornerback in Noah Igbenogany. I mean, obviously there are no guarantees, but I feel like this has to be the way they start to improve.
I agree with how all those additions would boost a defense, no doubt. But the stats, I think the stats are just too hard to overcome for the Dolphins. They are dead last in total points conceded in 2019 and ranked 30th for total yards conceded. I think it's unrealistic for them to make a significant jump in their defensive production to some mid-table team that would be like a semi-good defensively team. I don't think, and considering that most of the players are quite young, I don't think we can expect them to make a jump, at least not a significant jump next season.
Well, I mean, if their defense was last in total points, that means that they only have one way to go, and that's up. I think the additions that Jack mentioned add much needed stability to the defense, and I think it has to improve. If it doesn't, then the team's going nowhere.
I agree, Emilian. When the team is at the complete bottom of the statistical category, I feel like obviously there's only one way to go, and that's up. Even if it's not a significant jump, as you mentioned, Anthony, any kind of jump will be an improvement off of recent years, and I feel like they will at least jump up one or two spots. They've got too good of a defense now. I mean, with Byron Jones and Xavier Howard, that secondary is now really quite good, at least on paper. So they have to make some sort of jump.
I mean, I completely agree with you that they'll improve a little bit. I'm not arguing that they'll improve. I'm arguing that they won't improve by that much at all. Because considering that we talked about before in our last question that we don't really think that the offense will be that good at all. Jack, you made that point compared to the Jets. I think that the offense not being very good will play a big role in the defense not being very good, and that will constrict their ability to improve as a team defensively.
I feel like the only reason why this defense won't improve significantly is the fact that most of their starters will be different. They might need more than a few games to gel and understand each other's play, especially with the lack of a preseason. But I feel like there's no other. There's definitely going to be some sort of improvement. I feel like it will be quite a significant one.
I want to move now to the Buffalo Bills, and our first question for them is, are they favourites to win the AFC East, Emilian?
I believe so. They seem to have all the right pieces to succeed. And to be honest, there's not much competition in that division. Obviously, the Jets and Dolphins aren't ready to compete for the division title. The Patriots are, but as I mentioned before, I don't think they'll make the playoffs. So for me, the Bills, it's their division to lose.
Yeah, I agree with you, Emilian. Before the whole saga with all the Patriots players opting out, I was a firm believer that the Patriots are still the team to beat in the AFC East. But since they have opted out, I think the Bills have the talent over the Patriots to definitely win a division, especially having Stephon Diggs, come to the Bills, and players like Devin Singletary entering his second season. I think that they definitely have the talent over the Patriots to definitely win a division, and there's no doubt that they'll that like they won't be challenged by the Dolphins or the Jets at all. So it's definitely their division to lose.
I'd be concerned if the Bills weren't the favourites. Obviously, based off last season and this year's offseason with Brady departing the Patriots, I'd be pretty concerned if the Bills weren't favourites. Obviously, we're expecting to build on last season's success. I'd be concerned if they weren't the favourites at this point.
I think if the Bills weren't to perform, we could see a bit of an NFC East trend come out of the AFC East, which would not be good. But it could definitely well happen if the Bills don't perform.
What do you mean by an NFC East trend?
4 teams that are nowhere near good enough to get to the championship game or make a significant playoff push. I mean, if the Bills don't perform and confidently win a division, considering that it's anticipated to be so weak, we can't really. I wouldn't be expecting them to go very deep into the playoffs if that was the case.
I agree that they are the favorites to win the AFC East. The defense has retained the majority of their starters, and of course they added a playmaker on offense in Diggs. So for now, I think they're definitely the favorites for this division.
On to our second question for the Bills, and that is how far can Josh Allen take this team? And I don't think he can take this team very far. There are definite accuracy concerns with Allen, and I'm not sure if that's something that can be easily fixed. He's been in the league a couple of seasons now, and I think it's a similar situation to Mitchell Trubisky, where after a certain amount of time in being in the league, his mechanics haven't really changed, and so I don't know if Allen can improve much on his accuracy issues. But he has Diggs this season, and so there are no excuses for him this season. And I feel like another first round playoff exit for the Bills, and I'll start asking serious questions about Josh Allen's future.
Yeah, I completely agree with you, Jack. If he doesn't perform this season and win a playoff game, then I don't think he'll be at the Bills for that much longer. But especially that the NFL has introduced that third wildcard spot in the playoffs, I think it really gives the Bills a chance, especially in a division that they're anticipated to win. It gives them a solid chance to win a playoff game. And considering that they've got Stephon Diggs, which really complements Josh Allen's deep ability to throw the ball really far down the field, that's a massive asset for him to have. And I mentioned before in the previous question that having Devin Singletary entering his second season will only add more experience to his career and more stability. And I think along with the aerial threat in Diggs, it'll be complemented by Devin Singletary's ability to run the ball.
I think this year is definitely a make or break year for Josh Allen. He has to prove that he is ready to lead the team. And now that he has Diggs, he doesn't have any excuses. That being said, he doesn't really need to be a great quarterback for this team to make a deep playoff run. I think it'll be similar to Jimmy Garoppolo and the 49ers last year. I think that Bills defense is elite and they can take the team very far. Devin Singletary showed a lot of promise last season. I'm expecting big things from him. So Josh Allen, I don't think is going to be the man to lead the team into, a deep playoff run. I think that's going to be the Bills, but the defense, sorry. But he definitely has to be at least good to take this team far.
He can take them to the playoffs for sure. I think the Bills will most likely have to go through the wild card round since this year the NFL introduced the rule about only one team in the conference getting a first round bye, and that'll probably be the Chiefs. I think they'll be able to make it to the divisional round game, but I'm not sure if they can really progress further than that this season.
So if they don't progress further than that, what do you think happens to Allen?
I think there's a possibility that he'll have his job definitely questioned. I think they do have a bit of security there in draft pick Jake Fromm. They'll be hoping next preseason maybe he'll be able to show something, and if Allen doesn't get it done in the playoffs, maybe doesn't win that wild card game, then there's a possibility that we could be seeing Fromm in his position very soon.
If he does take the team to the playoffs and they lose in the first round, I feel like he will keep his job for the next season, but then that next season will be the make or break year where if he doesn't make it again, then he's gone. He would have to have a pretty catastrophic year this year statistically if he were to lose his job at the end of this season. I don't think that'll happen, but I do think that he does limit the potential of this Bills team and especially of this Bills defense. And so, we'll see just how much he actually limits them. That concludes our State of the Franchise teams for the AFC East, and we're going to move swiftly onwards to the AFC West now, and we'll kick it off with the reigning Super Bowl champions, Kansas City Chiefs. And our first question for them is, can they replicate their success from last season? Emilian.
Absolutely. I don't see why not. Tyreek Hill said himself that he thinks they can win 7 Super Bowls, and while that may be extreme, the Chiefs haven't lost anyone that important. Obviously, they lost Laurent Duvernay-Tardif, but they've signed 3 of their best players to long-term deals. They're ready to win multiple Super Bowls over the next few years, and I don't see why they can't do that this season. Mahomes is entering his 3rd year as a starter. I think the best is yet to come from him.
So, Emilian, when you say that they can replicate their success from last season, do you think they're going to win the Super Bowl again this season?
I think they definitely can. I haven't made my predictions for the season yet, but I definitely think they're obvious Super Bowl contenders for this season.
I think they'll play at a similar level to last season, but I don't think they'll win the Super Bowl again in 2021. I think this year it'll be a team like Baltimore or New Orleans instead.
Yeah, man, I completely agree with you. They haven't lost anyone significant on their roster, so there's no reason that they won't go back-to-back or at least get back into the playoffs and go deep into the playoffs.
I don't see why not either. I mean, they re-signed 3 of their biggest stars this offseason, and they should definitely challenge for another Super Bowl.
Obviously, they have every chance to go back again, but we do know how difficult it is to go back-to-back and win 2 Super Bowls in a row. So that is why I'm a little bit skeptical of that.
I agree with you, Jack. I know that it is difficult. It is very difficult for a team to, replicate back-to-back Super Bowls. But if there's one team that can do it out of the 32 teams in the league, it's definitely the Chiefs.
On to our second question for the Chiefs, and that is, what is their biggest weakness?
I think their biggest weakness is cornerback. They have Ward and Breland who impressed last year, but behind them, there's a bunch of unknowns. It's also unknown if Bashaud Breeland is even playing, since he is facing a suspension for an off-season arrest.
For me, the biggest weakness is because Damien Williams, we all know he's definitely an underrated back and he's above average, but he opted out of the season. So now there's a massive question mark regarding Clyde Edwards-Helaire and whether or not he can produce a game. However, I mean, he doesn't need to produce at a very high level for the offense to be one of the best in the league. I think that the passing attack is very strong, obviously one of the best in the league. So Clyde Edwards-Helaire really just has to be serviceable for their offense to shine.
Emilian, I don't think Edwards-Helaire will have any issues fitting into that Kansas City offense. He's got Mahomes there. He's got a really good offensive line. I don't think he'll have any struggles there fitting in, and even just being, as you say, a serviceable running back. I feel like their biggest weakness, if I had to choose one, would be their linebacking corps. Hitchens is an average linebacker. I think maybe you can push it and say he's maybe slightly above average, but he's just average. And if I had to pick a weakness, I'd say it would be the linebackers, because as well as that, there is not much depth at all behind him. And so if Hitchens were to go down, I feel like there would be an issue at linebacker.
I agree with that point, Jack. I feel like it's kind of similar to their cornerback situation, in my opinion. There is not much depth back there. But in the offseason, they did go out and draft Willie Gay Jr., and the coaching staff seems to have high hopes for him. So if he's able to perform and come in for Hitchens, that would be a really good thing for them.
Yeah, I'm sure the coaching staff has really high hopes for him, Arif, but I don't see a mid-round draft pick coming in and just, filling the whole of a veteran like Hitchens in that defense. On to the Las Vegas Raiders now, and our first question for them is, will a change of scenery help the Raiders, Anthony?
I think that this is kind of it's an interesting question, because I think a lot of people would disagree and say that if you're just moving, it doesn't actually do anything to help a team's talent. But I feel like there's quite a few young players on the Raiders team, and I feel like reinventing the organization and moving to a new city, especially like Las Vegas, it would do a lot for the younger players in terms of their confidence, going into the season. So I'm not saying that this move will breed the Raiders to become a team that's like 13-3 or anything. But I think going forward and being able to rebuild a little bit quicker will help. It will help them rebuild quicker, having moved to a new stadium and to a new city.
I think for this season, I don't think really the move is going to do much, mainly because there won't be many fans at the stadium, if any. But also, I don't think the franchise as a whole will be very new until they find a new quarterback. Derek Carr has been on the Raiders for a while, and until he's gone, I don't really think the Raiders' whole image will change all that much. They have changed quite a bit in terms of their roster, but I think until they find that new franchise quarterback, that they'll have relatively the same image.
I agree to an extent about your point, Anthony, about the change of scenery. I feel like it's good for the franchise to kind of create a new image. Las Vegas do love their sports, and I feel like while they had a really good fan base down in Oakland, I feel like they will have a similarly good fan base in Las Vegas. However, I don't think it'll help the team perform better, as that's not really how these kind of things work. But for the franchise, I think it was a good move, and I think it will help the team in that sense. Our second question for the Raiders is, can they compete for a playoff spot this season? Personally, I don't think they can. Derek Carr is an average quarterback at best. Their recent draft selections have produced very little, and I'm very skeptical about their draft choices this year, especially their early draft choices. They made a couple of semi-decent free agency acquisitions, but I don't think it's enough to lift them into the AFC playoff discussion, Emilian.
Sorry, you said that their recent draft picks haven't produced much at all. Do you think Josh Jacobs hasn't produced much at all?
I'm referring more to Clelin Ferrell and Jonathan Abram and Max Crosby, who have not produced much at all at the time in Oakland.
I mean, Jonathan Abrams played less than one game in the NFL. He was injured in game.
Well, that's my point
of the season, so he can't do much.
Yeah, but that's what I mean by they've produced very little. Jacobs is the one guy in their recent draft selections who has produced quite well. But that is just one player in recent years, and I can't really think of any other Raiders players who have taken the league by storm in their first few years in the league.
While Clelin Ferrell definitely didn't produce as well as you would expect from a first-round pick, it was his rookie season. He's got a lot of time to improve and develop and become a great defensive end. That being said, I do think the Raiders can compete for a playoff spot. The AFC West, I reckon, is one of the most competitive divisions when it comes to getting wild cards. But I think, with the Broncos and Chargers there, all three of them are at relatively the same level. And the Raiders definitely did make improvements in the offseason. Josh Jacobs is only going to get better. And their roster as a whole has a lot of depth, and I'm very excited to see what they can do next year.
I don't think they'll compete for a playoff spot this year. They gained a lot of talent, but since they have a bunch of new starters, it might take a while for them to get going. Also, they're in a really strong division with the Chiefs a lock pretty much to win the division, and fellow up-and-coming teams in the Broncos and Chargers who have really strong defenses.
I honestly think, I mentioned before how the NFL has obviously had a third wild card placing in each conference. I know that the Raiders aren't, I wouldn't anticipate them winning one of those wild card spots, but they weren't that far off it in 2019. And I know we don't really, I don't anticipate them to actually, reach the playoffs. But if there's more of a chance this season that they could get that last wild card spot and just get into the playoffs. It could happen.
Just back to your point, Emilian, about the draft picks there in Oakland or in Las Vegas now. But in 2018, you only have to look as far back as 2018 when they picked Colton Miller in the first round. They picked PJ Hall in the second round. He's no longer with the team. They just haven't really had a lot of success in the draft, and that's the point I was trying to make then.
Yeah, I do agree with you. Their draft picks recently haven't been great, but I think that their roster as a whole is still relatively good. They have one of the best offensive lines in the league. Their wide receiver depth is really good now that they've got they drafted Henry Ruggs. They've also got Tyrell Williams, and Hunter Renfrow is always improving. Their tight ends Now they've got Darren Waller and Jason Witten there for depth. I think their roster is very strong. They're set to continuously improve over the next few years.
Well, hopefully for their sake, they can. As we move on to the Denver Broncos, and our first question for them is Drew Lock a franchise quarterback? And personally, I don't think he is at this point. It's obviously very early to be discussing whether he is or isn't, but at this point in his career, I don't think I've seen enough to say that he is. He had a decent year last season, but I'm not sure I saw enough out of him to be able to confidently say that he is the future quarterback of the Broncos.
For me, it's way too early to tell if Drew Lock's franchise quarterback. I liked what I saw at the end of last season when he played those last 5 games, but it's nowhere near enough for me to assess his potential as a franchise quarterback. I think for me, I need to see at least a full season from a quarterback, maybe even 2, to know whether or not they're right for the franchise.
I want to move to our second question for the Broncos, and that is, how long will it take the Broncos to get back to the playoffs?
It could be sooner rather than later with the extra wildcard spot available this season. I feel like in their division, the Chiefs, obviously, as we talked about, a division lock. The Chargers and the Broncos, I feel like, will be vying for that wildcard spot. And, it really could be in the 2020 season that they get it.
For me, I think the biggest complication with the Broncos, apart from whether or not, we talked about before, whether or not Drew Lock can be there in the long term and perform to a good level, I think that aerial game, I think that goes a long way to the Broncos making the playoffs. I mean, in 2019, they ranked 28th in receiving yards, and they don't really have, apart from Cortland Sutton, they don't really have that many producers in that receiver core. I mean, hopefully I think in the future they need to go to the draft or trade to get some veteran talent at this position so that they probably can provide more consistency for Drew Lock to get the team into the playoffs again.
I completely disagree with you. Their biggest concern for me is definitely that offensive line. It's really bad, and the reason they were 28th in passing yards last year, yes, Cortland Sutton was really their only big target, but he had Joe Flacco thrown to him, who's a statue in the pocket. Behind a terrible offensive line, you can't expect much production there. I think the Broncos can definitely make the playoffs this season or next year. As I said before, the AFC West is one of the most competitive divisions in terms of getting a wildcard spot, but they have a really strong defense. They've got a young team overall. They went out and drafted Jerry Jeudy in the first round. I think they're set to make splash either this year or next.
Yeah, that's a good point, Emilian. They did go out and draft Jerry Jeudy. Also, KJ Hamler, and we can't really forget about the development of Noah Fant either. So they did prioritize their aerial game this offseason.
I think if Lock plays at a semi-decent level this season, they should be able to get back to the playoffs this season. As you guys mentioned, with the guys they brought in through the draft with Jeudy and Hamler. While I feel like Hamler, he may take some time and he may not pan out as a receiver, Jeudy definitely is almost a sure thing in terms of a wide receiver prospect coming out of the draft. I think they made some pretty decent acquisitions in free agency as well. And however, if they don't make the playoffs this season, I'll be looking directly at Drew Lock and that offense. I'm going to move to the Los Angeles Chargers now. And our first question for them is, how much of a concern is the quarterback position?
I think it's probably the biggest concern for the Chargers right now. The offense hasn't played the season without Phillip Rivers throwing to them since 2003. So basically, the entire offense will have to readjust to play with Tyrod Taylor because he will have the starting job at the start of the season for sure. But I don't think he's a franchise quarterback at all. So I think he'll only be there for the production of Justin Herbert. But then I'm not a believer in Justin Herbert. I think it's a bit early to say, but I anticipate he'll be a bust later on in his career. I don't think he will be that. I don't think he'll be the franchise quarterback for the Chargers. And given that Tyrod Taylor won't be that, I really think this is a massive issue for the Chargers, for the long term.
I agree with you, Anthony. I think it is the biggest concern for the Chargers here because neither Taylor nor Herbert are going to be strong quarterbacks behind that offensive line. We saw a lot of people saying, Taylor is a strong quarterback and he was good in the Bills, but we saw how terrible he was on the Browns. He got taken off for a reason. And I think with Herbert, if he starts early in the season, he's not going to be very productive at all. The offense is going to suffer. So I think for his benefit, he needs to sit on the bench for the season, at least wait until the later stages of the season to start. And that'll definitely set him up for more success in the future.
I think the quarterback position is relatively concerning for the Chargers. Herbert simply isn't ready, as you mentioned, Emilian, and Taylor hasn't been serviceable since, his Pro Bowl season in 2015 with Buffalo. And so I feel like it's really important that, Taylor steps up this season and, kind of takes some of the onus of the defense to carry this team.
I agree with the points you guys have made. However, the Chargers do have a really solid security blanket in Austin Eckler. I feel like he'll be really beneficial to Taylor succeeding with that porous offensive line they have over there in Los Angeles.
I made the point before, but I really want to point out again. I really think that the offense I mentioned before, the offense hasn't played without another quarterback consistently since 2003. I think that's massive. Like, it's not just the quarterback that needs to step up in the system to perform well. I think the whole offense will struggle. Just the fact they haven't played with another quarterback for such a long time.
On to our second question for the Chargers, and that is, how good will their defense be? And personally, I think it's going to be very good. They made some really nice off-season acquisitions to go with some already great names on that roster, like Joey Bosa and Derwin James.
In 2019, they ranked 6th in yards allowed per game. And, as you mentioned, Jack, there's off-season additions. There were Linval Joseph and Kenneth Murray via the draft. So with a defense already pretty good, those additions will only make the defense get even better. And I think it will really, really put the Chargers in a good position to improve on their 2019 campaign.
Yeah, their passing defense will definitely be one of the best in the league, with Derwin James being healthy, hopefully, and I would say Chris Harris Jr. Coming onto that team. For me, the big question mark is their run defense was fairly average last season, and if they can get that going, maybe make it a great run defense, will definitely be a defense to fear.
They made some great acquisitions, as you guys mentioned. I think they have the best secondary, one of the best secondaries in the league. Your point about the run game, Emilian, I think they really made a conscious effort to address that in the offseason. I know he's aging, but Linval Joseph is an established run stopper that really provides that veteran presence in their locker room and on the field, and it should go a ways to solving their issues with their run defense.
Yeah, I've mentioned before in previous episodes how a defense can only be so good as long as the offense can perform and keep the defense on the field for not a significant amount of time. So I think with the issues with the quarterback room for the Chargers with Justin Herbert and Tyrod Taylor, I think if they can't get the offense to perform and so that the defense isn't on the field for too long, then I think we could see the defense not perform as well as we would anticipate in 2020.
That caps off our State of the Franchise episode 3 of 4 for the AFC East and West. Next week, we have the AFC South and North to cap off this State of the Franchise series, so make sure you tune in next week. If you haven't already, make sure you go and check out our Instagram. That is at touch.down.under. That is where you can find all of our podcast and non-podcast content. So go check that out. We're also on Twitter at the TDU Podcast. We premiere our podcasts on Facebook and YouTube at TouchDownUnder. Thank you guys for listening, and we will see you next week.